My neighbor disappeared overnight. 18 months later, I found out what really happened. Some mysteries don't announce themselves, they just appear, where something used to be. He lived in the house directly across the street from mine in a quiet subdivision outside of Nashville, Tennessee. We weren't close, we were the kind of neighbors who wave from driveways and occasionally talk over the fence about nothing important. He was in his late 50s, divorced, kept his lawn immaculate, drove a gray Subaru, had a golden retriever named Hank who barked at my car every morning with extraordinary dedication. Paul disappeared on a Wednesday in April. I say disappeared because that's what it looked like from the outside. One morning his driveway was empty. The next morning, still empty. By the end of the week, the mail was piling up. Hank wasn't in the yard. I called the non-emergency police line after 5 days. Not because I thought something terrible had happened. Paul was a grown adult, and people leave without announcing it. But because of Hank, a dog doesn't leave on its own. The officer who came did a wellness check. No one home, no signs of disturbance. Everything locked, everything in order. They noted it and left. Paul's adult daughter, I found her contact information through a mutual neighbor who had it from a previous emergency, told me when I called that she hadn't heard from him in 2 weeks, that this was unusual, that she was worried. She filed a missing persons report, and then nothing. For weeks, then months. The house sat empty. A property management company appeared and started maintaining the lawn. The mail stopped piling up, redirected, presumably by whoever was now managing his affairs. Life moved around the absence of Paul the way water moves around a stone. I thought about him periodically, wondered. But there was nothing to do, nothing to act on. He was just gone. 18 months after Paul's driveway went empty, I was at a neighborhood block party, the kind of event where you talk to people you've lived near for years but barely know. I ended up in a conversation with a woman named Greta who lived 2 streets over. She'd been in the neighborhood for 20 years, the kind of person who knows things. She asked if I'd heard what happened to Paul. I said I hadn't, that I'd been wondering for 18 months. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has been holding something and finally has someone worth telling. She said, "He didn't disappear. He left on purpose, and I don't think it was his idea." Here is what Greta knew, gathered over 18 months through the specific information network of someone who has lived in a neighborhood long enough to know everyone and notice everything. Paul had been, for approximately 3 years before he vanished, involved in a financial dispute with his former business partner, a man named Craig who had co-owned a construction supply company with Paul for 12 years. They had dissolved the partnership 4 years earlier, acrimoniously, with competing claims about who owed what to whom. The dispute had gone to arbitration. Paul had been awarded a settlement. Craig had refused to pay. The legal back and forth had continued for years, consuming Paul's savings in legal fees while Craig's lawyers found ways to delay. Then something shifted. Craig had, it emerged, connections that Paul had not fully understood when they were partners. Business connections, the kind that make certain problems go away, the kind that, when a legal situation becomes inconvenient, can make an opposing party decide, suddenly, quietly, that pursuing the matter further is not in their interest. Greta was being careful about how she said this, and I was being careful about how I heard it. Paul hadn't been made to disappear. He had been, Greta's phrase, encouraged to relocate. Through means she didn't specify. The settlement debt was forgiven. Paul dropped the case. Paul left Nashville. His daughter Greta said, knew where he was. He was in a small town in Idaho. He was fine. He had simply started over. Somewhere that Craig's connections didn't reach. I stood at that block party with a plastic cup of lemonade and I processed this. A man had lived across the street from me for 4 years. He had waved from his driveway every morning. I had watched Hank bark at my car, and underneath all of that, There had been a years-long pressure campaign that had eventually pushed him out of his own life. Invisible. From across the street. Is Craig still here? I asked. 2 streets over, Greta said. Has been for 15 years. I didn't say anything. He lost his business last year, Greta added. The connections apparently have limits. IRS came in, audited everything. He's in a lawsuit with 3 former clients. Lost the big house. Drives a used Honda now. She said it without particular satisfaction. Just as information. The way people report neighborhood news. The house across the street sold 8 months ago. A young couple moved in. They have a beagle who has no opinion about my car whatsoever. I think about Paul sometimes. In Idaho, with Hank. I hope the lawn there is easier. I hope he waves at his new neighbors from his driveway. I hope whatever he rebuilt fits him better than what he left behind. And I think about how much can be happening right across the street that you never see. How many stories are running parallel to your own? How many people are carrying things, invisibly, quietly, in houses you drive past every day without slowing down?
My coworker was running a fake identity for 6 years. I unraveled it in a weekend. I work in HR, which means, professionally speaking, I know more about the people around me than they realize. Hire dates, salary bands, disciplinary history, emergency contacts. The skeleton of a person's professional life, filed neatly in a system I have access to every day. It also means that when something doesn't add up, I notice. Not because I'm looking for it, because inconsistency is noise, and I've spent 12 years training myself to hear noise. His name, as far as anyone in our office knew, was Derek Hollis, Senior Project Coordinator. He'd been with the company, a mid-sized logistics firm in Atlanta, for 6 years before I arrived. He was well-liked, competent, the kind of person who showed up early and left on time and never gave anyone a reason to look at him too closely. The thing that started it was a benefits enrollment error. Every year in November we do open enrollment. Employees update their health coverage, beneficiaries, emergency contacts. Derek's form came back with a discrepancy. His listed social security number didn't match the one on file from his original hire 6 years earlier. Not by a lot, 2 digits transposed, the kind of thing that looks like a typo. I flagged it and sent him a correction request. Standard procedure, he responded within an hour, apologized, said he'd mistyped, submitted the original number. I filed it. And then, for reasons I can't fully explain, I sat with it for a moment. 2 digits transposed. On a social security number, which most adults know by heart. I pulled his original hire paperwork. The number there matched his correction, so the error had been on the new form. That was the explanation. A typo on the new form. Except, I looked at the new form, and the handwriting was careful, deliberate, not the rushed scrawl of someone filling out paperwork quickly. The number had been written with attention. It felt like someone who had written a different number, and then remembered they weren't supposed to. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I was reading into a clerical error. Maybe I was, but I've processed several thousand hire packets in my career, and something in the texture of that form bothered me. I ran the original SSN through our background check vendor, which I had authorization to do for active employees as part of routine compliance. The name that came back was not Derek Hollis. I stared at my screen for a full 30 seconds. Then I ran it again. Same result. The social security number on file for Derek Hollis, the number he'd provided at hire 6 years earlier, belonged to a man named Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb had died in 2003. He was from Savannah, Georgia. He was 41 years old when he died. And he had, in the years since his death, apparently been employed at 4 companies across 3 states, all of them. I found this over the following weekend by pulling publicly available records, in logistics and supply chain, all of them in roles similar to Derek's, all of them ending with a quiet resignation and no apparent reason given. I want to be precise about what I felt at this point. Not panic, not excitement, a kind of very focused calm. The same feeling I get when a number that shouldn't balance, balances, when the pattern becomes visible. I called our company's legal counsel on Monday morning, before I did anything else, before I said a word to Derek, before I mentioned it to my manager. Our counsel contacted the FBI's Identity Theft Division, because that's what this was, Not just resume fraud, not a background check irregularity. Someone had been living under a dead man's identity across multiple states and multiple employers for what appeared to be at least a decade. The investigation moved quickly once the federal piece was involved. Derek Hollis, whose real name I will not share here because the case is still partially ongoing, had assumed the Marcus Webb identity after leaving a previous life that included, among other things, a felony conviction that would have made him unhireable in his field. He had purchased the identity through channels I don't fully understand and don't need to. He had used it to build what looked, from the outside, like an entirely ordinary professional life. He was arrested on a Tuesday. 2 federal agents came to the office. They were quiet and professional about it. They asked Derek to come with them. He went. He didn't look at anyone as he walked out. The office was very still for about 10 minutes afterward. Then someone made coffee and people started talking in low voices, the way people do when something large has passed through a room and they're still processing the shape of it. I went back to my desk. I finished the benefits enrollment audit. I filed the Derek Hollis file under a separate category. My manager came by around noon. She asked if I was okay. Yes, I said. How did you even notice? She asked. 2 digits, I said. Transposed on the enrollment form. It looked wrong. She shook her head slowly. 6 years, she said. He was here for 6 years. I know, I said. I think about Derek sometimes, about what it takes to maintain a false identity for that long. To remember, every day, who you're supposed to be. To never slip. To build relationships, colleagues who liked him, who trusted him, under a name that wasn't his. What a weight that must have been. Carried every day, for years, and lost because of 2 digits on an enrollment form in November.
I discovered my company had been underpaying women for 11 years. I had the spreadsheet to prove it. I want to start by telling you what kind of person I am at work. I am thorough. I am quiet about it. I document everything. I have been this way since my first job at 22, when a manager took credit for a report I'd written, and I had no proof it was mine. I vowed then I would always have proof. I am also, as it turns out, the kind of person who notices patterns in data that other people look at every day without seeing, which is perhaps why it took someone like me, in the right position, at the right moment, to find what I found. I joined Verity Solutions, a software consulting firm in Denver, as a senior data analyst in 2019. About 40 employees, mostly technical roles. The leadership team was entirely male. The analyst and project manager level was more mixed. This was not unusual in the industry. I had worked in tech-adjacent fields for 9 years. I had learned to navigate the specific texture of that environment. 2 years in, I was given additional responsibility over compensation data as part of a system migration. We were moving our HR and payroll systems to a new platform. My job was to clean the data, verify it, normalize it, prepare it for import. Routine analytical work. The kind of project that is tedious and invisible and that nobody thanks you for. I started with the salary data. It took me about 4 hours to notice something wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not a glaring error, a pattern. A consistent structural pattern that emerged when I sorted the compensation data by role, then by hire date, then by gender. Across every job level, analyst, senior analyst, project manager, senior project manager, the average compensation for women was lower than for men in the same role. Not slightly lower, meaningfully lower. In the analyst tier, an average gap of 11%. In the senior analyst tier, 14%. Project managers, 9%. The senior project manager gap stopped me, 17%. In a role where the work is identical, where the client deliverables are identical, where the performance expectations are identical, I looked at my own salary. I was a senior analyst. I had been at the company 2 years. I had received 1 merit raise. My compensation was, I looked at the data, 11% below the average for male senior analysts with equivalent tenure. I closed the spreadsheet, I went to the kitchen and made tea. I sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes. Then I went back to my desk and I exported the full compensation dataset to a personal drive. I want to be clear about something. I had legitimate access to this data for the migration project. I was authorized to work with it. Exporting a working copy for analysis was within the scope of my role. I was careful about this. I was careful about everything. I spent the following weekend building a proper analysis, controlling for tenure, controlling for performance rating, controlling for hire year, controlling for every variable I could identify that might legitimately explain a compensation difference. After all, controls, the gap remained, smaller in some categories, but present in all of them, consistent enough and systematic enough that random variation could not explain it. This was not an accident. This was a structure. I reached out, carefully, privately, to 2 women I trusted at the company, a project manager named Sandra who had been there 7 years, and a senior analyst named Priya who had joined 6 months before me. I showed them the analysis. Without sharing individual salaries, I had anonymized the individual level data before showing anyone, just the aggregate pattern. I felt this for years, she said. I didn't have the numbers. Priya said nothing for a moment. Then, what do we do with it? I had thought about this carefully. Going to HR internally felt futile. HR reported to the same leadership that had presumably set or approved these compensation structures. Going public immediately felt premature. I wanted the analysis airtight first. I contacted an employment attorney. She reviewed everything I had. She asked precise questions. She wanted to understand the methodology. She brought in a statistician she worked with on cases like this. Yes, this was a thing. Cases like this existed. To validate the analysis. The statistician's conclusion. The pay gap was statistically significant at the 99th percentile confidence level. In plain language, there was less than a 1% chance this was random. We filed a complaint with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the federal agency that handles workplace discrimination claims. The complaint named the company and included the full statistical analysis. What happened next took 14 months. The EEOC investigation required Verity Solutions to produce internal compensation records going back 11 years. The investigation found that the gap I had identified was not only real but had been present, in some form, since the company's founding. Not because of a single decision, because of a series of small decisions. Starting salaries set slightly lower for women at hire, merit increases slightly smaller, promotions slightly slower, that compounded over time into a structural gap. The company settled. Total back pay and damages to affected employees, just over $1.2 million, distributed across 23 current and former female employees. The CEO issued a statement. The leadership team attended mandatory compensation equity training. A third-party auditor was appointed to review compensation annually for 5 years. My settlement check was significant. I'm not going to give the number, but it was significant. I left the company 6 months before the settlement was finalized. Not because I was pushed out. They couldn't touch me, legally, and they knew it. But because I had made my point, and because staying felt like choosing to be somewhere I had proven didn't value me. Sandra stayed. She was promoted to director 8 months after the settlement, the first female director in the company's history. Priya stayed too. She got a 22% raise as part of the back pay process. She called me when the check arrived. She cried, not because of the money, because someone had finally looked at the numbers and said, "This is wrong. This has always been wrong. And here is the proof." I think about the data migration project sometimes, how it was supposed to be tedious and invisible, how nobody was supposed to look too closely at what was in those spreadsheets. I looked closely. That's what I do. And sometimes, looking closely at the right thing at the right moment is the only thing that needs to happen.